In this video, I'm breaking down my unkillable solo PvE god tank build for New World Aeternum. This is the setup that lets you solo almost every boss in the Catacombs. No healer, no problem. I'll show you exactly what gear I'm using, what perks to aim for, and how to turn your character into a walking raid boss that just refuses to die. Let's start off with my weapon artifact. Serenity, I think, is still a phenomenal tanking option, as this gives you a max stack of 20% Fortify, giving you an insane amount of tankiness across the board. This is exactly what I plan to put in my Serenity, a slash damage, harnessing, and an enchanted on my Serenity here just for maximum damage, because the more we deal, the more we heal, boys. And that's how you get peak survivability. Now my sword is very bad, don't look at it, it's a horror, as this is just my filler sword for at the moment. You definitely want a gem slot, this is non-negotiable, as you desperately need a carnelian, since they did remove that from my brother in Christ, the Serenity, which is a very big nerf to our build. But what exactly would I want in my sword? Well, to be honest, I would just want Rend on my sword here, and then just gem slot and 4 offensive slots, or 3 offensive slots. This will allow my Serenity to deal even more damage, since the offensive charms on your back bar can affect the front bar. One perk here at the bottom, Rend, gem slot into 3 offensive charm slots. That's what I want for my sword, so I can just keep pumping on the Serenity. For my heart rune, I like starting with heart rune form, as this gives me heal and some fortify. You can definitely play around with whichever heart rune you like. This one is just too good to pass up, simply because if I don't have a healer, well, I need to heal myself. And this thing is kind of an old crap button when I'm getting onto the later bosses in the Catacombs, or I just want to solo open world content. This build will allow you to do anything you want, as you are just that unkillable. Next up, for your amulet, I like Divines and Health still with the plus 1% max HP. The Tricky Empowered here is definitely useless, but the gem slot is very nice. Right now, the new amulets aren't looking that enticing to me, because the protection perks, well, they're more lined up to the certain content you're doing. And right now, the content has a bunch of different types of damage, such as elemental and physical, meaning that building towards one or the other is extremely hard. So I just like having flat health and divines right now, as divines increases my overall healing and health increases my overall survivability. In terms of amulet, I still prefer the old one right now. I'm not sure exactly what I would like on the new one. Blood Drinker, this is exactly what I'd recommend running. You have Leeching and Enchanted here for more damage. More healing means more unkillability. This is exactly what we want. How about our earring? Healing Heart Rune is a must in my opinion, as this gives you so much extra survivability in the dungeon. You pop this paired with Stalwart Heart Rune, you're healing your whole HP off one button. That's a massive oh crap button. Next up, you definitely want Despise if we're taunting the enemies, as this will allow us to deal 5.5% damage. Now, if you're solo, you would want the other one as well, the Beloved, where you generate less threat, because that will also allow you to do additional 9% to the bosses and all enemies around you. If you're running solo, that would be phenomenal, but since I'm running in a group, sadly, I don't trust myself to be that on top of taunting to prevent my teammates from eating it. Next, and for my final perk here, I would definitely want Fortifying Toast, and Empowering Toast would be phenomenal, or Refreshing Toast. Any one of these 3 perks would be amazing to get here on my earring, but ideally for my earring, I would want 4 perks with 1 offensive slot here once again, just so I can heal more on my Serenity. So that breaks down my jewelry, my weapons. But how exactly should I gem this? I would actually recommend slotting nothing but these hardened crystals here, or turquoises, as they're mentioned in the game. Since we have so much across the board, stacking these, in my opinion, is actually more beneficial than stacking the damage resistance, as that's only good against 1 damage type. Then you would put the Punishing Rune Glass on there to deal an additional 1% damage to all melee weapons, allowing us to shred bosses while being extremely tanky. Now, to break down the gear that I want, well, it's actually relatively simple, as I don't really want any perks on my armor. As for tanking, well, the perks just don't really slap. But the perks that you do want are all these one-shot perks, so such as Lifesteal Draught, Vital Synergy. All of these are a must on the tank build. So if you see something that has like a one-shot perk, you want it. Another great example is Mortal Aggression. These ones are extremely valuable as they allow us to stack more healing, more damage, and more survivability all in one. That's what I call a beautiful Happy Meal. Now that we're fully locked in, what's the perk I want on all my pieces of gear? Well, that is hands down have to be Sacrifice Empowerment. Absolutely best in slot for tanking, as there's really no other god perk. This gives me more base damage, but decreases my armor by 1% when I drop below 50%, which should only happen for about half a second or 1 second, then I'll heavy and get all that health back in terms of my overall survivability. Alright, now that we know we only want 1 to 2 perks per gear, what charm slots do we want to be looking for across the board? Well, you always want a gem slot for your armor. This is pretty much non-negotiable unless you get some weird god roll where you get a Sacrifice Empowerment and all the one-perkers in one area. Otherwise, you just, no matter what, always want a gem slot on your pieces of gear. After that, what do I want to look for next in terms of charms? Well, I want to stack all Leeching on all my pieces, so 5 of these have to be stacked. This is non-negotiable, and this will just give me flat more survivability in every dungeon. Next up, I want Enchanted Ward. This perk right here, but for my charm slot, where I reduce the damage from light and heavy attacks by 2%. You can see it here on my Void Darkplate already. That's exactly what I want to have. And then for my third and final perk, depending on what I'm doing, if I'm doing more hard content where I need to be more survivable, then I will switch to something like health, so wellness. But if I want to be more solo orientated, I would actually go for slash harnessing here to allow me to pump even harder on the Serenity, as harnessing is better than enchanted for pure damage. So ideally, if I'm soloing, I would want 5 harnessing here across the board, the slash perk right here, 5 enchanted across the board, and 5 leeching across the board. That is exactly what I would want for all my charm slots. This will give you an insane amount of survivability, tankiness, and overall power to the raid. And the number 1 perk you want to be looking for is just Sacrifice Empowerment. That's pretty much it. And now you're good to go. And ideally you would also want stuff like Vital Synergy and the one-perkers to be hitting. And for my artifact of choice, it's got to be Void Darkplate. I'll explain how to get this gear at the end of the video, so don't worry. Void Darkplate, this increases our armor by 20%, giving us a massive amount of extra survivability. That stacks phenomenal with our already 3,000 armor, and then the Fortify coming from Serenity gives us another 20%. If we get an earring with Fortifying Toast, that's another 20%. And then if you get the 2 must-have perks that give you an insane bonus, I'm going to look over to my Wizard. Hopefully I have the charm for you so you can clearly see it. You desperately want Keenly Fortify on this build. This is non-negotiable. This is a 1 slaughter. And you want Keenly Empowered as well. This is also a 1 slot perk. And there you go, guys. That is pretty much exactly what I want in terms of gear and charms for my entire PvE build. Let me break down the skills and weapon choices and the reason behind them. Let's start off with my artifact of choice, Serenity. I would recommend grabbing this. This comes from the PvP artifact track. This thing is phenomenal for tanking. Let me break down why. This thing gives you massive Fortify stacks all the way up to 20%. That increases our armor by a fat margin, giving us an insane amount of extra survivability across the board, turning us into a walking raid boss. Next up, what do I want to put on this bad boy? Well, slash harnessing and enchanted, in my opinion, is just best in slot, as this allows me just to pump more damage, which allows me then to heal more. And healing more, well boys, that's just free vampire survivability, and we will never die on the battlefield. How about my sword? My sword is not the best, so look away, it's a horror show. You want this for a gem slot. 1 perk, I would like a Rend here. Sundering stacks would be very nice, or something like Trenchant Rend. So when you heavy attack, you apply a Rend to the boss, giving you more damage. And the reason being, I want 3 offensive charm slots here. Yes, I mean 3. My sword is going to be a powerhouse for my front bar, as when you have charm slots on the back bar, it affects the front bar, aka my Serenity. This will allow me to absolutely chonk the bosses. I'll be chopping up these bosses left and right like Jack the Ripper was chopping up people in the streets of London. I will become their worst nightmare. I'll get more into what I want on my charms later, but first let's break down our Heart Rune. I recommend Sword Heart Rune form, as this comes from Lazarus, comes with Fortifying form and Mending form. This respectively gives me more armor and healing, allowing me to get a great amount of extra survivability, furthering my chances on 1v1ing bosses and players alike. For my amulet, I'm torn on what exactly I want here, as amulet I think is the hardest thing to get best in slot this patch for a little tank like me. I'm still using my old one and I'm going to keep using it for quite a while. Let me break down why. Divines and health is massive for your own survivability, and honestly you just can't beat it. The new amulets drop a lot of protection perks such as slash and thrust, but the main issue here is when you enter into dungeons, the boss damage in Catacombs is completely different. You can't predict what the bosses are going to be doing in terms of damage, so therefore a protection amulet is completely garbage unless you have enough to switch them out at will, which I do not. If you're doing mutations, however, a protection amulet is mandatory. Hit activities, head over to mutations, and then see the top right here. You can then read the second perk down. This will tell you what the damage will be doing in the dungeon. So 50% nature damage means I have to start stacking nature protection. So if my amulet had nature protection on it, health, and divines, that would be pretty much ideal for a build like mine. Now that we have amulet out of the way, let's break down the ring, the blood drinker. This is non-negotiable if you want to solo things or be your own carry, as this thing gives you a phenomenal 25% lifesteal and 5% increase from all incoming life-stealing effects, turning you into Dracula himself, as you'll be sucking every boss dry left and right. What do I recommend putting on this? Leeching and Enchanted, so we can work on every build of my choosing. Leeching is just for more survivability. Enchanted allows my Serenity to heal me more. The way Serenity does damages all through lights and heavies, so getting that Enchanted just is a flat damage increase. Now for my earring, it's much more complicated, as it depends on what you're doing. Ideally here, you would actually want 4 perk slots no matter what. For your amulet, I would still like a gem slot, but it's not as important on jewelry as it is on armor, as jewelry has much better perks than armor, so having more perks is definitely better. So my earring would want 4 perks. Let me break down the perks I want. Healing Heart and Despise are 2 mandatory perks, as one is an old crap button and the other one is a massive generate a threat, making me look even juicier. So I've been doing Photoshop all day and make myself look as pretty as possible for the bosses to look at me. I will also deal an additional 5 to 7% damage towards these bosses, giving me a flat DPS increase, which is massive for, soloing everything in the entire game. If you aren't running solo, by the way, I recommend taking Beloved, as this reduces the generate of threat that you will cause by about 40 to 50%, which is a problem when you're in a group, but you will deal about 8 to 9% more damage to taunted foes, just skyrocketing your damage to the stratosphere, and this is exactly what we want on a tank. More damage, more survivability. This is what this earring provides us. For our 4th perk, I would ideally want Fortifying Toast. When you drink a pot, you get an additional 20% fortifying for 8 seconds, and if you drink a mana pot, regen, or health, all of this will apply, making us an insanely more tanky, beefy, and an absolute menace on the front line here. For the ideal charm slot, I want offensive, because I can put another enchanted or slash harnessing in there, allowing me to pump more damage. Pump it up, baby. Now we let me break down armor, as armor is much more simpler to break down. Starting off with my artifact of the choosing, Void Darkplate. This thing comes from Black Barnacles. At the bottom of the map, right here, it has to be mutated. By the way, Blood Drinker comes from Everfall. Right here, Starstone Barrows. This one also has to be mutated. So, I recommend highly go picking these bad boys up when they come online, and Blood Drinker's online, boys. Well, it's time to lock it in. But how exactly do I want to build my Void Darkplate? Well, you can click add charms here and we'll look at the 3 defensive slots. Ideally, no matter what, you want keenly fortifying, as it has 20% fortify on a critical hit, making you just way more tanky. Overall, this is non-negotiable. This has to be on every build in the entire game, as that perk is just completely broken. Next up, you want Enchanted Ward. This perk right here on all your pieces of gear, as that's just a flat 2% damage reduction across the board. Why, you may be asking? Well, every boss in the entire game decides they just like to use light and heavy attacks to bully all the DPS children around, but we're here to stop that, and the Enchanted Ward gives us that extra tankiness. This goes for both roles, tanks, and DPS and healers alike. Enchanted Ward is a necessity when it comes to all types of content. So now that covers my Void Darkplate, how exactly do I want my other gear to look? Well, the only perk that's really good for tanking, in my opinion, is Sacrifice Empowerment for solo tanking, as this increases my base damage, making me hit harder, making me heal more, and the Rend only applies while I'm below 50% health, meaning as long as I'm locked in, I should be totally fine to rock and roll. Next up, you want the One-Perkers. The One-Perkers cannot stack multiple times, but they're definitely worth running on your build as they give some very powerful buffs. Examples of this would be Mortal Aggression and Lifesteal Drought. These are absolutely amazing to solo tank with, as it skyrockets your lifestealing through the stratosphere. Now that we have the vast majority of perks out of the way, there is one more bonus perk. It's called Terminal Vengeance, where it increases your base damage by 4% every time you lose 25% of your max health. This is nice because we're always taking damage, which means we'll always have this pretty much procced on our build. But now let me break down exactly what I'm looking for the rest of the armor. I want a mandatory 1 defensive slot across the board so I can stack Enchanted Ward 5 times. After that, I need a gem slot that's non-negotiable, and then 2 offensive charm slots would be ideal, as that will allow me to pump more damage on the front bar, giving me, in turn, more survivability because I'll be healing more. If you're looking to tank the raid, you'll need more defensive charm slots here, as you won't be able to lifesteal off a raid boss the same way you can in Catacombs or Mutations and other content like that. Just a quick TLDR. But this build's for soloing everything, and this build is not for having teammates, as we hate teammates as they continue to let us down. So what exactly charm slots am I looking for? Well, I grabbed a few so you guys can see. 1, make sure you have Keenly Empowered. This can't stack multiple times, but this is a 13% damage increase, allowing us to nuke our opponents into oblivion consistently. Next up, make sure you have Leeching stacked 5 times. This is non-negotiable, as this gives you just more overall survivability across the board. After you have your Enchanted Ward, your Leeching, your One-Perkers fully stacked for charms, next let's look to continue our damage route by stacking more Harnessing Enchanted, as this will just give us more damage, in turn giving us higher healing, turning us into a true raid boss. Now what about for gems? Gems, you want to run the punishing version of the Turquoises, as this will be good for all types of content, as this gives you 3% physical and elemental armor, just making us way tankier across the board since we're stacking so many fortifies. When you combine that with Turquoises, you just get so tanky, it's unreal. You want the punishing version of the attack, still 1% extra damage, just once again increasing our healing. The only exception to this rule would be if I went into a mutation that's an M3. At that point, it might be getting too hard. You would want to stack the correct element. You can see it right here on your screen. It's nature damage. Translation, I should probably run some nature gems, so these ambers would fit perfectly. That's 4% damage reduction flat, which is much stronger at that point than just armor. But for the vast majority of content, Turquoises are just fine, unless you're maybe going for M3 or Nighthaven Raid. Now that we have all my gear out of the way, let me break down my skill trees, the consumables I use to dominate, and the reason behind it. Alright, let me break down consumables, then we'll be off to the weapon skill tree and attributes. First, always have a honing stone. This is a flat 5% damage increase, non-negotiable. Next up, your wards and coatings are mandatory for dungeoning and Catacombs. This will give you flat damage increase and flat damage reduction, which is just unbeatable in terms of survivability. Know your opponent, know the game, and that's how you come out on top. Quick rule of thumb, if you're trying to do Cata, you don't need to pop any of these until about the 3rd boss. At that point things get a little bit trickier, but if you're a real G, you can wait till the 4th. For your attribute food, I recommend bringing the 48 version, as now stats are even more scarce since they have nerfed them across the board, making this fish taste like Gordon Ramsay's delicious 5-star Iron Chef meal. I would also recommend taking a Desert Sunrise, as reducing dots is very mandatory, as you have no way to really cleanse them. This gives you an insane amount of extra survivability, as dots can burn you into a new one. And just take an energizing hearty meal for extra mana regen. Very good, especially in Catacombs where you can use mana to block. This gives you once again just way more survivability across the board. For potions, all you really need is standard health and regens. I'm not using my expensive potions as I'm not Jeff Bezos. I can't afford the god tier potions, guys. Plus, I like a bit of a challenge. Now let me break down my attributes. So my attribute for Cata is very simple. I run a 50 constitution, just pop my food here, and then I run a flat strength and dex split. This is because I just want to be pumping damage in Cata and other parts of the map. If you're not doing hard content, like I mean M2 or above, M3 or raids, then 50 con is all you ever really need. You'll have so much armor that will do the heavy lifting. But think of health as kind of like a difficulty slider. The worse you are at the game or the harder the content, the more you can pump into con to make the game easier. For example, you never want to go below 250 strength though. This is mandatory, as this increases our stamina while heavying, and the Greatsword, while this thing eats stamina like a guzzler or your Tinder date from last night. If I was to recommend 2 thresholds for con, you have my con point 50. You can then go up to 100. This will give you a max 3% increase. But for the harder content, you should go all the way up to 200 con, and this will give you 5% increased physical and elemental armor, just making you once again more tanky across the board. The only downside here is you just don't have the healing once you go past 200 to really use Blood Drinker efficiently. This I would go, unless you want to do, let's say, Night Haven raid, then you'll need to switch around your whole build, and that's where lifestealing doesn't really become viable. But we're here to solo everything, and 200 con plus Blood Drink allows us to pretty much carry everything in the entire game except M3s and Night Haven raid. Now that we have our attributes out of the way, let me break down the weapon mastery. For me, this is my Greatsword tanking tree, and I wouldn't change this for the life of me. You used to run Calamity Counter over something like Steadfast Strike, as this would give you just more damage overall in terms of your DPS, as this applies a bleed, and it just gives you a nice heal. But you can't put a taunt gem into Serenity, so we have to run Steadfast and Roaring Rupture. This allows us to generate threat without a taunt gem. This is why I'm still able to hold any issues in my raids or dungeons, simply due to the fact that, well, Greatsword has its own threat built in. If I had a choice, I would like to get a god tier Greatsword roll and then drop Serenity, but right now that's a long ways away, so we're still stuck with this thing, gemless, homeless, and afraid. For my Sword and Shield tanking skill tree, this is what I recommend running, as Upheaval allows us to have massive cooldown reduction with 20%, which is humongous across the board, as bashing enemies and Defender's Resolve here are our main source of tanking. You hit a bash or a resolve here, and the enemies will look at you like you were a fresh baked apple pie from grandma's house. They're going to be eating you all night long. In terms of other weapons you can pair with this build, if you want to be less tank reliant, so SNS is purely for tanking, you can run Hammer for Rends. You can run Spear if you want to have a weaken through Skewer, and Perforate. This is another very solid option in my opinion. This is what I would personally run if I was just pure soloing, would be Spear and Greatsword, as I don't need to hold a taunt for anyone but myself, and I found to be Spear is very useful for that. It's massive weaken, massive rend across the board, is massive for your own damage and survivability. And last but certainly not least, my shield. I have forgotten about this beautiful thing, but hey, it's the least important as this one is pretty much about RNG the most. You want Hatred 100% here, as this allows me to pull more aggro, and it's also just, good for even soloing, as you'll always have taunt, therefore you'll always be dealing more damage. Very solid. Next, you will want the shield reduction passive, so -5%. I don't have a shield with it, sadly. I didn't get very lucky. As you know, my RNG is horrendous, and it's something out of a horror movie. Here it is right here. You also then would want a gem slot, and then after that, you can go for protection perks if you're doing mutations, but like I mentioned earlier, protection perks aren't good if you're in Cata or open world, as it's too situational. So after that, I'd recommend just getting full offensive slots here and 1 defensive charm, and slotting them the way I told you earlier. That pretty much wraps up my tank build come Season 10 for soloing everything. I'll make a updated version when I finally get the gear closer to best in slot, so you can really see me soloing literally everything in the game like I did last season. Right now, this build can solo, I guarantee you, the 5th boss in Cata. I won't be able to kill it, but I'll be able to solo tank it with no healer. I don't know about the 6th one yet. That one might be a little too hard for me. We'll have to wait and see. I haven't gotten that far. So with that, boys, if you did enjoy this video, it would mean a lot to me to hit that like button and subscribe. And while you're at it, come check out the stream, as I will always be theory crafting and testing things live. Plus, I have a massive unboxing today, so make sure to come check that out. And with that, hope you guys all have a fantastic day. Huge shout out to my YouTube channel members, and peace.